November 4th, 2020. This is One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show, coming at you for the next 90 minutes here on Twitter. The man on the other side of my Zoom screen is Chris Baccia. I'm Nick DeLuca. Alex Woles doing the production tonight. Chris, always great to be on with you. I know you've been a busy man lately, doing a lot of things that are more important than this. I'm glad to give you a bit of a break tonight.
Yeah, no, coming full circle here. I was on WFUV's election night coverage last evening, and it went late into the night. And even after our coverage, I couldn't sleep, and actually haven't been able to sleep for a bit of time in anticipation of America's choice. So here we are, and hopefully we can cool it off, talk a little sports, and I think that will give me a little bit of a break, a little bit of a refresher, maybe for you too at home. If you could tune in and just hear us babble about the Giants and Jets instead of the chaos that continues to ensue as we count the vote.
Well, it won't be a complete distraction. We will be getting to America's choice for AL and NL MVP, in addition to many other things. The Jets and the Giants. What's that?
The baseball writer's choice.
That's right. The baseball writer's choice, which is, well, okay, it's maybe not as important, but you know what? We'll pay attention to it anyway. Jets and Giants to kick things off. Some NFL headlines with Antonio Brown returning to the NFL gridiron on Sunday. Jimmy Garoppolo going down with an injury, and a pretty quiet and pedestrian NFL trade deadline. Not a lot of movement there, perhaps a little bit less than we would have expected, and we'll get into all of that. Steve Cohen and the Mets offseason priorities, and then an election-themed segment to close things out, voting yes or no on a number of sports topics that we will get into towards the end. I want to start with the NFL, and we just sort of get into the New York teams because that's who we're paying the most attention to. The Jets, I don't want to say it was disappointing because I think it's really what everyone expected. No one was thinking that they would go into Arrowhead and compete with the Chiefs. This just in, they did not. Patrick Mahomes, 5 touchdown passes and a 35-9 drubbing over the Jets. Mahomes, again, the 5 touchdown passes. The Jets have 4 passing touchdowns all year. And in the end, it wasn't any bit a surprise, and the Jets are still staring at 0-16.
No surprise. And yes, 0-16 looking more and more likely every day, which, you know, that'll always shock me, though, that's a possibility after they won 7 games last year. So you're not talking about a regression of a couple of games. And after you win 7 games, by the way, you look to break through and win 9 the next year, 8 the next year. Maybe, you know, a bad year would be to lose. It would be to win 6 and have and take a step back. But this is a step back like no other. Funny enough, the highest paid Jet on the field was Le'Veon Bell on the other team, which maybe says everything you need to know about how pitiful it's become. And I really have run out of adjectives for it, Nick. I really have.
Yeah, there's really not much to say, and it was interesting to me to just get a chance to watch a little bit of that game, peeking in and out, and they were sort of competitive out of the gate, but then things went downhill quickly, and I loved that stat that I read off just a moment ago about the 5 touchdown passes for Mahomes and the 4 touchdown passes for the Jets all season, with the quarterbacks Darnold, Flacco in there for a couple of games. And that, I think, sums up their season about as well as any number, thought, or statistic could, because they have just really struggled, to say the least. 0-16 certainly on the table. I feel like they do have a chance this weekend. New England has not been playing well. Cam Newton has been struggling. If there was ever a time for them to steal a win, could it be this week?
Yeah, well, for whatever reason, I think it could be. And by the way, as much as 0-16 looks realistic, and it is, I don't know that that'll happen. It's just such a mind-boggling accomplishment almost to lose 16 games that you almost have to try to do it. Because in the game of football, every once in a while, you walk into a stadium where the other team just isn't ready. It happens. It happens to even good teams. Are the Patriots a good team? I don't even think they are. So with that being said, maybe this is the week. There's always a little bit of intrigue with that matchup. And maybe just a little bit of Jet magic. I'm not sure why I would believe that, because of course the record would show that the Patriots have the edge there. But the Jets have a couple of funny wins against this team, a couple of big wins against this team. So maybe this Sunday is one of those funny, weird ones where a terrible Jets team beats a Patriots team that isn't very good. That's just the bottom line. These two teams may end up as at the bottom half of this division.
The funny thing is, in talking about the Jets and the possibility of going 0-16, as bad as they are, they do not feel to me like a team that is that bad that they go 0-16, right? There are two teams in the history of the NFL that have gone winless throughout a regular season, 16 games in the regular season, those being the 2008 Detroit Lions and the Cleveland Browns more recently in 2016. And those teams, when you look at them top to bottom, were awful. And the Lions had no semblance of a quarterback situation. They end up drafting Matthew Stafford the year after. Dan Orlovsky was pretty famous now with ESPN for just running through the back of the end zone in that safety in that season. And the Browns ended up starting DeShone Kizer, who was a second-round pick, clearly a project, and he just ended up starting that whole year. This is a guy who's been a career backup in the years following that, since they have moved on now to Baker Mayfield, but had moved on even before he got there. And the Jets don't feel that way to me, as badly as they have played. I think Sam Darnold is certainly a much better quarterback than either of those two teams and what they ran out there in those weird seasons. And that, to me, can make a huge difference. And I'm not here, and we'll get into Darnold in a second, because he's the other part of this, and now to the Trevor Lawrence conversation, and what do they want to do there, and what are we seeing from Darnold right now, and particularly concerned with him and reacting to the blitz and how he's reading some of the things that you'd hope he'd have a better handle on in year 3, and how that goes into coaching. But I do feel like there's enough on this roster, Mekhi Becton and some of their offensive line pieces, and not that they have good receivers by any stretch of the imagination, but when you look at Denzel Mims and Rashad Perriman, and Jamison Crowder, they're not awful. They're not scrubs to the point where they have nothing. And I know that their defense in particular is a work in progress, and there's not much there, but you feel like at some point, and maybe it's going to come down to the coaching that's been so bad, and that could be the explanation for why it's been such a struggle so far this year. And maybe they'll just get out coached in every game. But roster wise, as bad as they are, and Joe Douglas deserves his share of blame for that, they don't feel to me like an all-time historically bad roster, as bad as they are.
No, because they're not. They just aren't on paper. You're talking about a quarterback who's a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. And I know that doesn't mean much. We've had plenty that have been drafted that high and haven't produced. But you can't deny the raw talent. You cannot deny it. I mean, this was the quarterback at the top of a lot of teams' draft boards that year. And here we are, and you mentioned the coaching, and it always comes back to the coaching with this team, because that's what it is. It is a failure of coaching. It's a failure of culture. It's a failure of motivation, week in and week out. It's the only thing you can point to. It's intangible, but you know that there's something on that Jet team, because that Jet team won 7 games last year. And it's not the same team, but a lot went wrong. A lot has gone wrong since Adam Gase has arrived. And we're at a point where anything that was good there has been stripped away and is gone, absolutely gone. And so he needs to be removed. It's inexcusable that easy first step hasn't been taken, because that is the easy first step. The only justification for it is that you want to lose games. And that theory, by the way, is supported by a lot more than the fact that Adam Gase is still there. It's supported by the fact that you're trading Avery Williamson for nothing, for a couple of footballs. It's supported by the fact that you're letting Le'Veon Bell go. So, and of course, Jamal Adams before all of this started. So this is an 0-8 team that doesn't need to be 0-8, absolutely doesn't, and absolutely doesn't need to be 0-16. Completely agree with you. So, how do you fix it? You get rid of the head coach. I've said it 100 times. I'm tired of it. I'm just tired of it.
No, I'm with you there, and I'm sure that there will be a change because at this point it's really just indefensible. Even with the friendship and the relationship between Joe Douglas and Adam Gase, I think at this point he's got to say, look, I got to do what's best for this organization, and I have to keep my job. The only thing that could potentially get in the way of that would be Christopher Johnson if you feel like he would be hesitant to get rid of him, which I just don't know how you defend that at this point, and we'll see.
When does it happen?
Yeah.
When do they
I
do
think it's going to be after the season. That would be my guess. But
I understand that, but after the season is after they may be 0-16 or 1-15 or so. Are they trying to lose games here? Are they?
I think they are. I think that's the message that they're sending. They're a huge fire sale. They're getting rid of their players. You listed off a number of them. I'll throw McClendon into the mix there as well, getting shipped off to Tampa Bay as a guy who is a key cog in the middle of their defense, as a leader from a leadership standpoint, maybe more than even his play on the field. And they're just getting rid of everybody. So they are throwing in the towel, waving the white flag on a grand scale right now. And they're saying we're going to try and lose. And it really comes back to, and all signs point toward, they are full steam ahead trying to get Trevor Lawrence because they don't apparently, and maybe Sam Darnold hasn't given them the reason to believe, but they don't believe in him right now. They didn't put anything around him, didn't put enough around him. They said they were going to go into some semblance of this rebuild while he's in the third year of his rookie contract. That's not when you do that if you have the quarterback. They clearly don't. They're trying to lose right now, and that's the reality of it because they're going to take a quarterback. If they're at number one, they're taking Trevor Lawrence. That's just what it looks like right now.
Yeah, and as they should. I can't say that that's the wrong move. If things don't, improve, and they won't. They aren't going to. But you're right that it's no longer a theory. It's absolutely, in practice that the Jets are trying to lose games this year. And that raises a really interesting question because tanking and attempting to lose games has actually proven to work in baseball, in basketball. It's not a bad long-term strategy. I don't believe it works in the National Football League. I don't believe it should be undertaken in the National Football League, trying to lose games. There's something different about a football locker room. There's something different about the chemistry to win enough games, to break into the playoffs, to be competitive, that has a lot less to do with the personnel than some baseball teams that we've seen put together. And when I was younger, it was the Houston Astros and the Chicago Cubs, who were the two worst teams in baseball and at times winning less than 60 games. And there was no chance, no matter what you inspired in that clubhouse, that those teams were gonna even knock on the door of being competitive those seasons. So they traded some talent at the deadline. It worked. I don't really believe that formula works in the National Football League.
I would disagree with you in some sense, but it's depending on the scale with which you do it on. I think that Cleveland for a long time tried to tank the Browns, where they went Moneyball with Paul DePodesta, a guy who was in the Mets front office, and tried to apply that sort of strategy with Cleveland. And what they did is they were going to try and lose and then trade back, accumulate as many picks as possible to give them the best chance at hitting on the number of draft picks and then going forward. And that worked, and it didn't work because they missed on a number of the draft picks, and it didn't work until they got someone new in there who knew how to use those draft picks in John Dorsey, and then their new regime in building that roster. And look, they're still not a finished product. They look like they may be on their way to a playoff appearance this year, expanded playoffs. They didn't look great against the Raiders, but you would argue they're in the right direction. But I don't think that large-scale tanking works. You don't want to be bad for those number of years over and over and over again, where you're talking about first and fourth pick, where you're tanking constantly. I will say, though, to write off the rest of this year in order to get a guy like Trevor Lawrence, you don't get too many shots at that. And that to me is different. I know that it's, and the biggest thing here is that you have to get rid of the coach afterward, by the way. So they have to distance themselves. They got to get rid of Adam Gase at the end of this because you need someone to come in there, a new voice, a new face to come in there and say, okay, this is what we are doing now. This is our new culture. We are going to win. But for the rest of this year, when you're not going to be competitive anyway, you're already 0-8. The season's over. You're not good enough to compete in this NFL. You haven't been helped by a really difficult schedule, I might add, where they're playing the best division in football in the NFC West and a pretty darn good one in the AFC West as well. When you have to deal with all of those things, it's okay. You can punt on this season when you are staring Trevor Lawrence at the number one pick in the face. I don't think it's a good strategy long term, but for this year, no, I think they should be doing what they're doing. You got a chance to grab Trevor Lawrence. That could be a franchise changer. And I know it didn't work out with Darnold at number 3, and they gave up a lot. But you know what? At the end of the day, you got to keep trying because the NFL starts and ends with the quarterback position. You either have one or you're looking for one. It looks like the Jets are looking for one right now, and there's a really good one at number 1 when the draft rolls around in April.
So the NFL doesn't start and end at the quarterback position. The quarterback position is the most important position in all of sports. Absolutely. But there is a lot more to building a successful franchise than the quarterback position. You cannot put everything on Trevor Lawrence. How many of the guys that are in the locker room now will be a part of next year's team that may be led by Trevor Lawrence and a new head coach? It's a lot. It's a lot. And they're left with a toxic culture, and they're left with an organization that made a decision at the top to lose games. That's the first problem. The second problem is Trevor Lawrence as a prospect, I have no reason to believe is a better prospect than Sam Darnold was 3 years ago.
He is.
And I take your word on that, and I hope you're right. But whether or not, and it's easy to say now after we've watched Sam in the league for 3 years. So these prospects are just prospects, and it always needs to be said. So would I be excited about a new quarterback in a Jet uniform and a new head coach? Yeah, but I mean, I've seen a lot of new head coaches walk through those doors.
You've been excited before.
I've been excited before. So this is where we are. The bottom line is the mistake that I've seen the Jets make time and time again is put a new quarterback in a system, in a situation that isn't prepared for him. Build the team first. Build the offensive line first. Get a running back, a receiving core, a defense. Install your quarterback and get ready. I actually like what Miami is doing with Tua Tagovailoa. I think that at least letting Ryan Fitzpatrick start the year put them in a position. I am just with the Jets. I will have absolutely no reason to believe that it goes better the next time. And I'm already starting to think of head coaching candidates. Maybe Eric Bieniemy from Kansas City, but my opinion remains that, and I hear you, after 8 losses, there's almost a part of me that says, of course, the year's over. Even if they won out, they wouldn't be a playoff team. But so why not just go the rest of the way? I actually have that instinct. But, I continue to believe that the time was yesterday and the day before to make the head coaching change. So if they make it tomorrow, it's better late than never for me.
For sure. There are a lot of problems with this organization, head coach, probably the most glaring. So we'll leave it at that for the Jets. Chris Boccia has been excited before, but there's not a lot of excitement rolling around New York football right now. The Jets are a disaster. The Giants, well, they're only one game out of the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes. They lose an exciting game, 25-23 on a 2-point conversion attempt that was failed. They got a flag, and then it was picked up. Daniel Jones a little bit late on the read, but they gave the Bucs, probably the favorites in the NFC right now, a run for their money. But the question lingering after that game has to be the play of Daniel Jones. New York started well. They come out to a 14-6 lead at the half, but a couple of costly turnovers, 2 interceptions by Daniel Jones. He finishes 25 of 41, 256, the 2 picks to go with the 2 touchdowns, a QBR of 62.0. The defense played well enough to win. They did a very good job of containing what was a pretty prolific Tampa Bay offense who made enough plays when need be, but the Giants just weren't able to get enough done on the offensive side of the ball. They were able to run the ball better than they had throughout the duration of this season. They run for 100 yards. Wayne Gallman, Alfred Morris in that running back mix. But it all comes down. We're talking about how important the quarterback position is. It all comes down to the quarterback, and Daniel Jones is a little hard to categorize right now. Had a great touchdown pass, but that 2-point conversion was like, what the heck are you doing? How are you feeling about Daniel Jones right now?
Well, there's a lack of a clutch factor. There's a little bit of buffoonery. It, at times reminds me of his predecessor, Eli Manning, who is an all-time great quarterback, but had a way of making foolish choices and poor turnovers at poor times. So I certainly see that quality in him. A lot of question marks there. A lot of question marks, and appears to be following the footsteps of his counterpart in New York at the quarterback position in Sam Darnold and a couple others that we discussed, who at year 2, when asked to make the big step with the new head coach, hasn't been able to do it. Evidently has not been able to lead this team to wins. And interestingly, with the Giants, they keep games close. And in that sense, they pierce their fans with daggers week in and week out. It's a little bit different from the Jets, who don't even make it worth your while to sit down and watch the games on Sunday. But certainly Monday night was an example of that.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest takeaways from the Giants' perspective is you feel like they've got the right head coach there, because that team was ready to play. They're not very talented. They've got a lot of holes, and there's talk about, and we might get into this later too, about Dave Gettleman and what his future might look like as the general manager of the Giants and some of the deficiencies on that roster, but they came ready to play. And that was shown in the way the defense came out and really punched Tampa Bay in the mouth. They were really good tackling, and I thought they did a good job of making things difficult early for Tom Brady and company. And the offense as well. I thought they established the line of scrimmage very well early on in that game. In pass protection, able to run the football, Wayne Gallman and Alfred Morris, again, able to get things going better than we've seen all season against a Tampa Bay defense that is very good, and very good against the run in particular. And the Giants were able to move the football on the ground. And Daniel Jones wasn't bad again early on in this game. He made a few throws. The one throw to Deion down on the swing pass I thought was really effective and was a really nice throw. But it's just that decision making, and it's the 2 interceptions and a number of balls that you know that he's going to want back. Even on that final drive, there were a couple of close calls where you're thinking, man, that should have ended the game, or how the heck did he complete that when that pass was into such a tight window, and he's got to be more careful with the football. But you heard it a number of times on the Monday Night Football broadcast, Brian Griese saying, just throw the football away. And that they, at one point, when Jones finally did, later in that game on the 4th quarter drive, they're celebrating. They're saying, geez, finally he's able to do that. And that's just, to me, the most frustrating part of this whole thing, because that's something from year 1 to year 2 that this guy's got to learn. At some point, yes, you're going to take your lumps. You know, as a rookie, there are going to be mistakes made. And I wasn't too concerned about the fumbling issue in year 1. And I thought that was overblown, because if the worst thing that your rookie quarterback is doing in year 1 is fumbling, that can be fixed. And maybe you can massage some of the pocket awareness. But at the end of the day, if it's just holding on to the football a little bit better, you're going to be fine if he's reading defenses the right way and making the correct throws. But this year, he just seems to be a little bit off with the reads, and you can see a clear regression from year 1 to year 2. I said this on the program this past weekend, and I was talking to you about this before we got on here. He reminds me a lot of Baker Mayfield with that year 1 to year 2 regression. He was so good in year 1, a number of 400-yard passing games, 4 touchdown games, and maybe there was a little bit more from Pat Shurmur than Giants fans would have liked to admit, because he's a guy who does have a very good track record with quarterbacks, maybe not as a head coach, but was able to develop quarterbacks very well. And maybe that was part of what Jones' success was in year 1, in addition to being ready to play and then teams figuring him out here in year 2. But I liked what I saw from him as a rookie. This year has been extremely disappointing. And the guys that are the best in the NFL, the ultra important quarterback position in the National Football League, are the guys that continue to progress as their career goes along. And we mentioned any number of quarterbacks who have done that. The one that jumps out at me, Lamar Jackson, year 1, he is throwing for 2 completions in a playoff game against the then Chargers. And then year 2, he's the NFL MVP. And I know he hasn't put it together and hasn't been as good this year. He had an unbelievable season last year. But that's the type of progression that you're looking for out of an elite quarterback. And Lamar Jackson as a league MVP is certainly in that conversation. The Giants aren't getting anything close to that with Daniel Jones. And now it begs the question about, are we ready to move on from him? Because there were some great throws. He did make some great plays. The touchdown pass to Golden Tate is as good as you can draw it up. The back shoulder, reading the defense, that is an elite of the elite throw to get that game within 2. But then when you get to the 2-point conversion play, they've got it. It's right there. It's Dion Lewis leaking to the flat on the 2 slants in, and you're done. It's great. It's an easy throw, and this game is tied. We're headed to overtime, and Daniel Jones is 2 to 3 seconds late with his read. The throw is behind him, and he cost the Giants an opportunity to win that game with that play and the turnovers.
Yeah, and I think by now the elite from the not elite, and clearly. And it can be said for both Daniel Jones and Sam Darnold. These are not elite quarterbacks. They will not flourish into elite quarterbacks. Can they be serviceable? Yes. Can they reach maybe what Josh Allen is doing now? Yeah, maybe. But they aren't. We're not putting them in Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes' second-year jump category. I think you knew that after the first year. But, you talk about turnovers being a problem. Yeah, it's a huge problem, and I don't think it's easily overlooked. I remember you made that point to me, actually, I think in our week 1 or preseason podcast here that, yeah, the fumble thing is easily smoothed over, but I don't know that it is. I mean, it could be a really fundamental problem with his game. I mean, it appears to be that way this year. Final thought is that, talk about Pat Shurmur, you reminded me that he was once a New York football head coach. There are so many that are just have brief stays here. Todd Bowles had a couple of years. Adam Gase will only get a couple of years. There was Ben McAdoo and many others that I'm missing. I never bought into the narrative that New York, because it's New York, was such a hard place to coach because of the fierce media. I was sort of always I always found that to be questionable. I mean, it can't be that bad, right? That the microscope of New York makes the difference. But with all of these failed head coaches, and the list is so long in both the Meadowlands, well, they both play in the Meadowlands, but both for the Jets and the Giants, I'm starting to buy that. I'm starting to buy that Adam Gase is a guy who is simply overwhelmed by the New York media. And a guy like Todd Bowles, who, especially when you see the success he has in Tampa Bay, the success that he had in Arizona, I sort of wonder, was that a good football mind that just got spoiled by New York and appeared to be somebody who couldn't be a head coach? But it's this New York X factor. Every day that I watch someone like Adam Gase, who, for all intents and purposes, from the endorsement of Peyton Manning, is supposed to be a great offensive mind, comes to this place and looks like he doesn't know what a slant route is. How does that happen? And I do wonder if there's a New York effect.
Yeah, I think it's a New York effect. And what I would say is it's a New York effect in the organizations that these coaches are going to, because you can talk about the media all you want. The media does not dictate what play you're running on 3rd and 5 or 4th and 1 or what's going on or who's starting at quarterback, who's starting at running back or left tackle. And these organizations are so screwed up right now. And that to me is the biggest issue. They're just there's nothing there. There's nothing good about Adam Gase is not winning with play calling, and he's got nothing to work with. I think the Giants are headed in the right direction, where Joe Judge again has them ready to play with that long week of preparation, and they're tackling well. You could tell that these are guys at least that want to be here, even at 1-7, but they are evidently not good enough to finish the job in close games. So it's just a number of factors, and even with the Jets, I think that you can make the argument that particularly since Christopher Johnson has taken over, their ownership is another can of worms that has really held them back. So I think it's the organization also, it is the media. I'm sure it's difficult to deal with that too, but to me, it's more about the organizations that these guys are walking to in New York as opposed to the media they have to deal with.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And as it's part of it's our industry. So I can't imagine that we ruffle enough feathers that it makes your job that difficult. I could see how there's more pressure, more of a microscope, but yeah, it's organizationally messed up. And to the Jets and in general, ownership is really hard to judge. It's pretty much all behind closed doors, with the exception of a few franchises. I don't know the Johnsons very well. Whether or not Christopher Johnson understands football is not necessarily relevant. I mean,
Probably not. I would say
it's almost better if he didn't and didn't pretend that he did and try to meddle in the football operation. So those are the best sort of ownership groups. And this will lend into our next conversation about new ownership in New York with the Mets. Just it can fundamentally alter everything, and that's where there's hope. The Jets appear to be mired in a similar situation with ownership. It's really speculation, but both Christopher Johnson and his brother Woody, who's over in the United Kingdom now, I don't know about these guys, and you're probably right. That's probably what this is all about.
30 minutes down, the Jets and the Giants are still screwed up. We'll get into some NFL headlines and everything that's going around the rest of the National Football League, where not everyone is either 0-8 or 1-7. This is One-on-One. You're watching 90.7 FM. Stay with us. One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show, nightly here on Twitter this Wednesday, November 4th of 2020. I'm Nick DeLuca, Chris Baccia, the other guy on my Zoom screen. So we're going to get into some NFL headlines and just evaluating the rest of the landscape of the National Football League, where, again, it's not all doom and gloom. There are good teams that play in the NFL. They just don't play here in this New York metropolitan area. The first thing that we want to get to is the return of Antonio Brown. The Buccaneers signed him to a one-year contract for the rest of the season. He suspended the first 8 games. We are now in week 9. He will make his debut. Bruce Arians saying that his snap count could be anywhere from 10 to 35 to all of the offensive snaps, depending on how the game goes. The Buccaneers will play Sunday night football against the New Orleans Saints in a big divisional matchup that will be, well, maybe go a long way toward deciding how things look in the NFC in terms of playoff picture. The Saints took the first meeting between these two teams week 1 in the first matchup of the season. So, Chris, Antonio Brown making his return to the National Football League, some injuries to this Buccaneer wide receiver core, but a good relationship with Tom Brady. They're actually living together down there in Tampa. What can we expect from Antonio Brown and your reaction to him getting a shot once again in Tampa here this week?
Well, the simple answer to the first question is I don't know. I mean, this is a guy who I'm not actually sure the tally on it, but it's got to be at least the third or fourth chance that we've seen from Antonio Brown. A brief stint in New England that didn't go well, a brief stint in Oakland that didn't go well, and I'm probably missing some.
Didn't go,
right. So here we are. I really don't know. There's if anybody will figure it out, it'll be Tom Brady. So there's something to be said for that. I like Bruce Arians a lot. I actually like this Tampa Bay team quite a bit, and I think they have a chance in the NFC South. And I'm very curious for Sunday Night Football. But on the whole, I really wouldn't bet on Antonio Brown. I just wouldn't put money on him. He's never produced when folks have put money on him making a return.
To me, this is such a weird situation because on the surface, you sit there and say, why is Tampa Bay making this move? They have Chris Godwin, they have Mike Evans, they have Rob Gronkowski, and any number of weapons, Scotty Miller, who Tom Brady has found a nice rapport with. So you're thinking, why are they going to risk their locker room culture at 6-2, 3-0 in 3-0 at home, and you're thinking about just some of these things, and you're trying to figure out ways to improve the team. But that was the thing for me that sort of begged the question of why are you making this move right now when things seem to be going very well? But at the same time, they do have injuries. Chris Godwin has not stayed healthy for the majority of this season and has had injuries throughout his entire career. Mike Evans has been banged up at times this year. They lose O.J. Howard, who is a tight end that they were going to rely on. Gronkowski has an extensive injury history as well, although he is a year off and a year removed from playing football. You think he could stay relatively healthy this year. But you're just wondering, why are they going to subject themselves to this? Well, Antonio Brown is, when he's got his head on right, one of the best wide receivers in all of the National Football League. There's no doubt about the talent. The way that he played in Pittsburgh with Ben Roethlisberger before he wasn't showing up to that one game, Week 17, was pretty incredible. He really was by all accounts, a good teammate, a guy that worked hard, and then things sort of fell off the rails toward the end of that season in 2018. And then he gets traded to the Raiders in 2019. He didn't want to be there, then ends up in New England. And the one game and then the suspension held down. The Patriots say, we're not 100% sure that this guy was honest with us and we have to cut bait. So it's going to be interesting to me to see how Antonio Brown fits in that locker room, because that's priority number one. Is he going to be able to deal with not being the number one receiver all the time? Because you know that he's going to get some of the targets and he's going to add a lot to that offense, but how does he mesh with the rest of the group? And I think that's the most important thing, because if he's going to be a distraction off the field, Bruce Arians has already said, look, we don't need this. We don't need this extra wide receiver as much as it can add another dynamic to our offense. If he's going to be a negative, we're just going to get rid of him. But if there's anybody who you feel like can get Antonio Brown to behave himself and be a team player, you'd think it'd be a team that's led by the greatest quarterback of all time in Tom Brady. I'm just fascinated to see how it works out in terms of target share. Where is Tom Brady throwing the football, and what does Antonio Brown's positioning look like? Is he going to be a slot guy? Is he going to play outside? You'd assume he's going to play more in the slot, and how does he adjust to doing that as a guy who has played the majority of his career on the outside the numbers, as a sort of X receiver as he moves inside? So I'm interested to see how he adjusts to that. Again, hasn't played in over a year, so how does he deal with being on an NFL gridiron once again? I know that I'm not in love with betting on Antonio Brown, but I think he's going to find success in Tampa Bay.
Well, it was this show, I want to say, not last week, but 2 weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I was on here with Tom Quigley, and there's this evolving question about Tom Brady that I think is really interesting that we've been hearing for a long time about how much of Brady's success do you attribute to Belichick and vice versa. And this year is really the experiment for us to actually watch and watch a New England team that is struggling and a Tampa Bay team that appears to have its order together. So this is maybe, the best test to see if Antonio Brown can come here and have success and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers can fly. Again, it just does even more to cement the legacy of Tom Brady. And I also noted, and will note again, it does feel funny to praise Tom Brady over these airwaves because I've never done it before. Never thought I would, but now that he's a Buccaneer, I'm happy to do it. This guy would be the guy, if there was going to be a guy, to get Antonio Brown's act together.
So we could be seeing more of a Tom Brady way as opposed to the Patriot way, and then it was Brady who was really able to keep that locker room in check as opposed to Belichick all those years. The one thing I would argue with that whole issue is that the Patriots are severely hamstrung by some cap issues right now and players who have opted out and sort of the outlook of their roster. And Tom Brady gets the benefit of jumping ship from a team that sold out everything to try and get to Super Bowl after Super Bowl after Super Bowl. And then when the cap situation gets bad, he goes and gets a clean slate in Tampa Bay as a team that's building with a number of young players, whereas the Patriots did a lot to try and win early on and were sort of paying the price for it later as you push all the chips to the middle of the table. And then, hey, our salary cap doesn't look very good right now, but hey, we won 2 or 3 Super Bowls before that. So I will say that is the one thing for Belichick, and I'll be interested to see how things progress for him maybe in the next 1 or 2 years, because then I feel like you have a better evaluation of it. And right now, and I always said, by the way, that it was Brady, because Belichick can do whatever he wants and coach the way he does. And we've seen Belichick without Brady. Again, that's a long time ago, and the NFL has changed. And this isn't to knock Bill Belichick, but you just have so much freedom to operate in a certain way and have such liberty to do things that you want to do when you have the greatest quarterback of all time. That makes more of an impact than does the greatest coach of all time. And that's clear because you have the option to say, hey, Antonio Brown, things aren't working out. We don't need you anymore because we can still rattle off 10 wins in a row to start the season. And they didn't finish the way they wanted to last year. And that's one of the contributing factors to Tom Brady leaving town and heading to Tampa Bay. But that's the one thing for me that it was always Brady giving him that option. But I'm interested now, and it's an interesting point that you bring up about, hey, was it really Brady who was able to sort of quell those personalities in the locker room and manage those guys to get them all pulling in one direction, or was it the Belichick program? Because if Antonio Brown comes in here and really does a good job, that's interesting to me, because then you're like, oh, well, Brady does come in here and command respect that is conducive to bringing any type of player into that locker room.
Yeah, the leadership of Tom Brady is something that you can never sell him short on, and this will be a very good test of it. Keep in mind, talk about cap problems with New England. Those were largely aided by the fact that Tom Brady consistently took pay cuts on that team. I mean, had every right to be the highest paid quarterback, one of the highest paid athletes in the world, and he was because of endorsements. I don't want to make it like he's poor, but he consistently allowed the New England Patriots to divert money toward other places on the team. That's the ultimate leadership job right there, because everybody says, pay me up. I want the biggest contract. You can't even blame him for it. But Tom Brady, for the longest time, said, I'll take a pay cut. I'll be the 4th or 5th or 6th, I don't even know, highest paid quarterback in the league if we can go win a Super Bowl. So you could never question that that's what he wanted to do in New England. That'll always be his legacy in New England. And there will always sort of be an unknown in the story of Tom Brady leaving New England, which is who drove that call. And I, for a long time, really did think that it was Bill Belichick who saw the slightest signal of decline from Tom Brady and said, okay, I'm going to move on. But also, now that I think about it more and more, it makes sense for Tom Brady's sake, especially when you bring up the cap point, for him to have left the New England Patriots and said, let me go to sunny Florida and see what I could do here with some weapons.
It'll be interesting to see how Antonio Brown fits with that team. Before we move on, just one last question here. Concerned at all about the effort by Tampa Bay against a much lesser Giants team going forward now to play New Orleans, who I think everyone thinks these two may be the 1 and 2 in the NFC.
I mean, this is what I was saying earlier about when a good team every once in a while just has a hiccup, and it could be attributed to that. I think you make a good point that Joe Judge had his guys ready. I think the Giants are better than 1 and 7, quite honestly. And maybe it's a product of those factors. My preseason pick was always the New Orleans Saints, and I've moved a little bit on that. This Tampa Bay team has impressed me. I haven't made a pick yet for this week, and I actually am not going to make one right now. I have to think long and hard on it. But yeah, there's a cause for concern there. I think it's a good game, though, ultimately. You could say the same about New Orleans, some of the games they've played.
That's fair enough. I didn't think they looked overly impressive against Chicago this past weekend, although they were able to get it done as well. So should be a fascinating matchup between those two teams, and interested to see how that one plays out. Again, 8:20 Sunday Night Football, the 5 and 2 New Orleans Saints, 6 and 2 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So from Tom Brady to his former backup in New England, we'll go to Jimmy Garoppolo here, who is looking like he will be done for the season with an ankle injury. He's at the process of gathering multiple opinions before deciding ultimately on surgery. Kyle Shanahan, the team's head coach, not overly optimistic. San Francisco also loses George Kittle. These are the defending NFC champion who are playing in a very difficult division and having to deal with Seattle and Arizona. This just does not look like it's going to end well. The Rams as well in that division, but this does not look like it's going to end well for San Francisco with the litany of injuries that they've sustained, and it's a huge blow to lose Garoppolo.
No, and I feel terrible for them, quite frankly. Put Kittle and Garoppolo and many of the other injuries that they've had, put those together, and it's very hard to produce a winning football team in this league, especially in the toughest division in the NFL. And, I don't know how they could pull it out. I don't think that they will be able to make any noise. 4-4 is pretty good for what they've sustained already. And actually, tomorrow's game is up in the air. I think Deebo Samuel is on the COVID list along with their other rookie receivers. So
Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams as well, their left tackle.
So really tough shape for this team. I have a funny feeling that they've just always run into bad injury luck. Jerick McKinnon was a guy who they brought in with a lot of hope. I think that was not last year, but the year prior. And the first thing that happened was the ACL. You've seen injuries with Garoppolo in the past. So it is a tough blow. They went into this season as not only one of the best teams in that division or the conference, but in the league. And now they're in a place where it's going to be very hard for them to climb up.
The Super Bowl hangover every year for the team that loses and even the team that wins, unless you're talking about the New England Patriots in the last 20 years, has always been real. It's always been difficult for teams that go into the Super Bowl, lose, and then the following year is very often a down year. I did not think that was going to be the case with San Francisco, and to their credit, it sort of hasn't been. I mean, they are, of course, last in their division right now, but they've had to withstand any number of injuries. And I'll throw on Raheem Mostert, who was a guy who was really important for them last year, Solomon Thomas, Nick Bosa. So they have just had injuries everywhere. They have the most injuries in the NFL. It's just been terrible, dating back to that game that they play in week 2 against the Jets, and things have just sort of fallen off the rails in terms of injuries from there. It's just been a really frustrating season for them to just try and get everybody healthy. And it's a really difficult blow because now you're talking about Nick Mullins in this division where you're going to have to make some headway if you want to make a run at the playoffs. And I don't know that he is good enough to do that. They have a very good roster, and that's a testament to the team that John Lynch has built. And Kyle Shanahan is still one of the best coaches in all of the National Football League. He does a great job of putting his offensive players in a position to succeed. Robert Saleh does a good job on the defensive side of the ball as well. So you're confident in the structure that they have in place. It's just at some point there are only so many injuries that you can sustain. And I think that this one to Garoppolo to end the season, you're also talking about losing Kittle for the rest of the year. I think that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. I think we're writing off the San Francisco 49ers as good as an organization as they are. It's just really difficult to sustain that many injuries. So finally, we'll just touch on the trade deadline. Not a lot of action for NFL teams and movement. Did that surprise you at all?
No, because the NFL deadline is almost always quiet. I actually can't really remember any big deals happening at the deadline. It doesn't really run the way baseball does in that sense. Avery Williamson is the one with the Jets, but it adds on to a long list of good players who this team was able to acquire at one point or another. In his case, they signed him as a free agent. They ran into some tough injury luck with him. And then that was the end of him, because this is an 0-8 team that has nothing going. So they traded him. And again, not to hammer down what we've already discussed, but this is a team that's trying to lose football games. And the Avery Williamson deal is every indication of that. They basically trade up from the 7th round to the 5th round. And in exchange, they give up a really veteran and very good middle linebacker.
Avery Williamson out of town. He's headed to Pittsburgh and happy about it. Outspoken on social media about that. Quan Alexander also headed to New Orleans. Isaiah Ford, the wide receiver, on his way to New England as sort of the headliners for a quiet NFL trade deadline. We're going to have to take another break. You're watching Nightly One-on-One. Stay with us. Morning Sports Call-In Show coming at you on a Wednesday night. Nick DeLuca, Chris Baccia, Alex Walls doing the production. We got to get into the offseason priorities for the New York Mets. I don't know if you've heard, Chris, but the Mets have a new owner. It's Steve Cohen. The Wilpons finally pulling the plug after a number of years. Are the Wilpons or the Coupons? I don't know which one, but regardless, there's new ownership. Steve Cohen, of course, with a lot of money and resources at his disposal to try and reshape this Mets organization that has sputtered the last couple of years amid some pretty hefty expectations, have not been to the postseason in a couple of years coming off that World Series run in 2015 and haven't been able to really recapture that form as of recently. So we're breaking down some of the offseason priorities for the Mets. Mr. Baccia, what is number one for you on that list?
Number one on that list is it's probably Trevor Bauer. It's probably a combination of Trevor Bauer, JT Realmuto, and George Springer. I would say go out and get them all. I'm not
sparing no expense.
No, because this guy's worth $14 billion.
Fair enough.
So I'm not super nuanced about it because I am really in a position of wait and see, whereas in the past I was an outspoken advocate for what the Mets need to do to a team that I knew wasn't going to do it. In this case, for the first time ever, I'm under the belief that this is a team that is actually going to behave like a New York team, more so than it had in the past, but more so than all of these other pathetic New York franchises. We've talked a good deal about the Jets and Giants. This is a Met team that for the first time, perhaps in its history, with the exception of a few years, is positioned to rival a Yankees team. And I don't know that that comes soon because this is a much better Yankee team than it is a Met team. And unfortunately, it's a Met team that if we talked 2 years ago or even a year ago, I would have said is as good or better than the Yankees. But things have changed and the window has shrunk, but obviously a lot of hope. And I'll start with, I think Steve Cohen's first move, which is Sandy Alderson, is a good one. And Sandy Alderson knows his way around the Mets organization, which is a good first step, but also one of the better executives really in the history of this game, and someone who I think oversees a good general manager hire. And from that point, I think the Mets are not only factors in the free agent market, probably the biggest players in the free agent market, but also absolutely players in the trade market. And, to wrap it up, we saw the Mookie Betts deal be the difference between a team that kept getting to the World Series to a team that won the World Series. And so the trade market becomes very important. And I imagine that the Mets will be on the prowl there.
The interesting thing to me, and we got into this again this past weekend, and the most important thing is that the Mets now have an identity about what type of organization they want to be. Yep. Because a lot of times in the past few years, they were sort of in flux. Are they a team that wants to budget and wants to operate like the Tampa Bay Rays or the Oakland A's, where you're sitting there and saying, look, we're spending $90 million. We have to build our farm system, and we're going to have to get our young players up to develop and play well, and that's how we're going to win. And then when they are on expiring contracts, we're going to trade them away because we need to recoup the value and start the cycle all over again. Or are we the New York Yankees who will perennially put as many resources and as much money behind being competitive as we need to and operate as a big spender? Nobody is unavailable for trade. Nobody is unavailable in the offseason when there's a piece that we feel like is out there to put us over the top, i.e. Garrett Cole. We are going to jump all over that. 9 years, $320+ million. That's not too much for us. We will make that deal if we think it can win us a championship. those are the two polar opposites. And I always felt like the Mets were in the middle of that. They weren't big spenders, but then would operate in a way that did not value the prospects that they had at their disposal. And that was more apparent, in my opinion, when Brodie Van Wagenen took the reins in the last couple of years, where he has really not made an effort to build up the farm system, but rather trade young players away to try and get some veterans who he feels like could help and contribute. And that's great, but they didn't really have the structure for that. And when you don't have the budget and you're not spending in that way, and you're caught in the middle and not developing on the young side, there's not much coming up when you have some of those injuries and some of those holes that have become a problem for the Mets in these past couple of years. Their rotation was great in 2019. Well, that was because everyone was healthy. Then you had a couple injuries. Stroman opts out, Syndergaard to Tommy John. And you're talking about pitching Rick Porcello and Michael Wacha at the back end of your rotation because you've got nobody in terms of young players who can come up and fill those roles. In 2019, the bullpen was brutal. They didn't have anybody who could come up and maybe stabilize what was going on, or even then make a trade that made sense from a prospect pool to help their bullpen and make a run. So there was just so much there where they were in between. And I think that's the most positive thing, where now they're pointed in a direction. They are the same type of organization that the Yankees are, that the Red Sox are. They have the money and the resources at their disposal. And by the way, that doesn't mean everything. My favorite stat, of course, is that in 2019, 3 out of the top 5 teams in Major League Baseball's payroll did not make the playoffs. So it's not about necessarily how much you spend. The Red Sox spent a lot of money on Hanley Ramirez and Pablo Sandoval one offseason, and guess what? That didn't work out. And you can go through the long list of teams that have tried on free agents and they have not gotten the returns that they expected on big contracts. So it's not all about just handing them out. But to me, the most important thing is that from an organizational structure perspective, where who the heck knew what Brodie Van Wagenen was doing, what the Wilpons wanted to do, whether it was make a trade and take on Cespedes' contract, or, oh, now we're a small budget team and can't go out and spend. Now they know what their direction is, and now you're going to go and try and operate on that. And I agree with you. Trevor Bauer would be a great addition to that team if they can get him. JT Realmuto, I think, is a bit of a long shot. I think it seems like he would stay in Philadelphia, but if they can get him, he's another great addition to the team if you feel like that's somebody who is attainable. So George Springer, another great guy you could plug and play in center field with some of the little production they've got out of that spot at times over the last couple of years. So I agree with all those points that you made. And I would also say that I would try and add to that bullpen that has been sort of a big bugaboo for them the last couple of years, and not understanding exactly what you're going to get from Edwin Diaz year to year, and Dellin Betances, who's going to be back for another year, but how healthy is he, and how much of the real Dellin Betances are you getting, and how much is that injury affecting him as he pitches later on in these stages of his career? So I think that it's about, in addition to that starting pitching, grabbing some bullpen help. But I think the Mets are in a good position, and now it's about making the smart decisions with that money that they have at their disposal. And you have to be more confident that Sandy Alderson is going to push the right buttons than Brodie Van Wagenen. And of course, Brodie's still there, but Sandy's going to be running and calling the shots.
Yeah, and who really knows how long Brodie will be there. Couple points here. You know, now I'm under the belief that when the Mets have a hole to fill, when they have a fourth starting pitcher or a fifth guy, they're not going to go make a budget move. Rick Porcello and Michael Wacha were budget moves. And they were actually, from some circles, they said, oh, good move. You got him at a good value. This is not a value enterprise. That's not how you operate in New York. If Tampa Bay goes and gets a good fourth for their rotation, and you're talking about, yeah, good value move, okay. But that's just not what this is. The second point is that the Mets are very close to being in a place where they've missed their moment. And when you went to the World Series in 2015, that could have been your moment. Didn't have to be, though. You still had a lot of youth and a lot of talent, and you said, we're going to be back here. Whether if it's not next year, it'll be the following year. We're going to be back here, though. We've assembled one of the best young rotations in recent memory, and had the chance to be one of the best in baseball history. It didn't shake out that way. Matt Harvey was gone pretty quickly. Zach Wheeler's now not there. But I no longer fear that I'm going to have to watch Noah Syndergaard pitch in, God forbid, a Yankee uniform or another Yankee uniform or another uniform. I'm more under the impression that I'll see the day when he signs a contract to be a Met for life. And the same goes for Peter Alonso. The same goes for Jake DeGrom when his sort of midterm contract begins to run out, that these guys will be Mets for lives. Mets for life. If it has to be done, it will be done. The Wilpons will point to a couple of times where they spent. For instance, they gave David Wright $138 million. They paid up Johan Santana. They paid Yoenis Cespedes. But you'll realize that what followed each one of those transactions was a year or two or more of inactivity. After they paid out Cespedes, they were pretty much done in terms of big contracts. They did take on Robinson Cano's contract, which was just an awful allocation of whatever funds they had. But they were working on a stringent budget. That need not be the case when you are one piece or two pieces away from a World Series. And there's no question that in the last 5 years, they've been in the position almost every year of being a piece or two away from a World Series. And they've missed it. They've missed it every year. So the window is closing. And we've been saying it. The window is closing. So here it is. The hope is that Steve Cohen comes in, salvages it at the last moment, and perhaps gets what is and what could very well be a great Met team in history. One of the best teams that they've ever put on the field when you're talking about Peter Alonso and Jeff McNeil to begin with on offense. And that, of course, is not the end of it offensively. But then on the other side, you're talking about the greatest pitcher that I've ever seen, almost definitely the greatest pitcher that I will ever see in Jacob deGrom. And you've got to ask the question, how are you not investing the house into this team right now? And the reason was because this is an ownership group that absolutely was always working on a budget and probably working on borrowed cash. We know what happened with the scandal with Madoff. And so here we are, finally freed of the monkey on the Mets back, which has for a long time been this ownership group. And every single Met fan that you will ever talk to knows it, that this is the root of all of their problems. We're finally in a place where if it's one piece or two pieces, now it's probably a little bit more than that, but whatever it is, they'll spend the money that needs to be spent to get it right.
I thought what you said about the pieces away was interesting, and that's what I wanted to get to next when you're talking about the moves that they need to make in this particular offseason. How many pieces do you think they are away? Because when you look at their roster, in my opinion, I feel like, okay, I like what they have in their starting rotation. I didn't hate even last year and this year what they had in their bullpen, and their lineup seemed to do well at times. And you like what you have with Alonso, albeit a down year, but with the assortment of pieces that they have in that lineup, Conforto as well, McNeil. And yet they're not making the playoffs. This is not even a team that is, okay, we lost in the division series or lost in the NLCS. This is a team that hasn't made the playoffs the last couple of years. So I get what you're saying about how you're one or two pieces away and that they'll spend it. But to me, this team feels like they're a little bit farther than just the 1 to 2 pieces away, because even guys that they've brought in and felt like they could rely on haven't stepped up. So you feel like now they've got to make some major moves in the bullpen. They got to address some of their position players in the back end of that rotation. How close do you think they are? Because it's weird. I agree with you in saying that I feel like they should be close, but they haven't put it together and haven't been able to even scratch the playoffs.
Well, closer than it may seem. 2019 was a team where they were, let's say, 2 pieces away. They were a bat and a top flight relief arm away from doing it. And where they plugged those holes was with Robinson Cano and Edwin Diaz. And not only were those not the fixes where they needed fixes and they needed pieces, but they were completely counterproductive. And they took that team back. I mean, Edwin Diaz blew, I can't remember how many saves, but it was almost double digits.
Records.
And that was a hard one to even blame the general manager on because of the track record he established in Seattle. Robinson Cano, you could have seen coming. It was a player that was itching for a decline. It was like everybody was waiting for Robinson Cano to decline, and the Mets got him at the very moment that decline began. And you could certainly point to some indicators that it was coming, and his age being chief among them. So there you were in 2019 with a team that really should have been good, and I would say the same goes for 2018 and 2017. 2016 they had tough injuries down the stretch, but this team is closer than it looks. But they are probably further than they were the couple of years that I referenced earlier. In that the rotation is no longer the sure thing that it was. Zach Wheeler's not there, and Steven Matz is a guy that we've been waiting to step up for now at this point too long. It's too long to keep waiting. So there's real work that needs to be done in the rotation. The offense to me is probably more promising than the pitching at this point. But one thing that you know about the pitching is that if you supply this staff with some offense, Jacob deGrom virtually guarantees you a win once every 5 days. That hasn't been the case. Somehow they've managed to lose more games with him on the mound, which is the most baffling and most Mets thing that there is. But, forgive me for launching into the supernatural a little bit, but I do believe that there's an aura around a baseball team, that there's some voodoo that is working. And it's been bad voodoo for so long. I'd say the same about the New York Jets. But the idea is that that something has left the building with the Wilpons, something that's the spirit of that ownership group is finally gone. And Steve Cohen brings a brazen energy. He brings he brings the can-do attitude that I'm excited to see in New York. It sort of feels Steinbrenner-ish. I wouldn't dare make the comparison to the incomparable, but it seems to resemble that in Queens, and it absolutely sets up a very exciting baseball landscape for our city when football certainly isn't giving it to us. Basketball hasn't given it to us. So to me, finally, some real promise in New York.
So a lot of excitement for this upcoming Mets offseason with a new owner, Sandy Alderson, going to be calling the shots for the Mets baseball operations. Chris Baccia outlining the number of things and priorities for them as they head into this offseason. Maybe some Real Muto, some George Springer, maybe some Trevor Bauer, and certainly getting rid of that voodoo. So we're going to work on getting rid of the voodoo and the spirit and the aura around the New York Mets, and maybe they can be successful in this upcoming 2021 season. We're going to take a quick break here. You're watching Nightly One-on-One here on WFUV Sports. Final 15 here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Chris Baccia and Nick DeLuca here with you, taking you to 10:30 here on the East Coast. We're going to finish up in the spirit of the election and election day with a little vote of our own, yes or no, to a number of burning questions around the sports world, including some New York topics, some MLB MVP question marks, and trying to break down who we feel like we should be voting for, yes or no, or which player we're going to cast our ballot for. Chris, you ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
All right. So let's do it. I guess we're going to start here voting yes or no to Sam Darnold as the future and franchise quarterback of the New York Jets.
So close to home here, and for the first 7 weeks of the year, I absolutely wouldn't have told you no. Maybe, you know, no, I'm sorry. Other way around. I would have said yes. Yes, meaning yes for Sam Darnold. Yes, I accept him. Right? That's what you mean?
Yes.
Okay. I would have told you yes for a very long time. It's getting to a point where the needle is moving. I'm not ready to say it in week 9, week 10, but certainly the clock is ticking. I'm beginning to think more seriously about the fact that the Jets will be without him, and I'm beginning to get more comfortable with that and less tied to that, because you know, as I say, with each week that we move on in the season, it's less and less looking like Sam Darnold's franchise. I don't know that it ever looked like Sam Darnold's franchise. So, you know, I will make a little bit of news here, and I will vote no on the future of Sam Darnold with the New York Jets.
As much as it pains me to say this as a Buffalo Bills fan, and as much as I would like him and Adam Gase, as things currently stand, to stick around, I'm also going to vote no on Sam Darnold as the franchise savior for the New York Jets. I think he can succeed because, man, oh man, does he have a lot of tools. And I think he could go to a more competent organization and be successful, but not in New York and not with this coaching staff and not with what's being put around him. I think he needs a breath of fresh air and a new set of eyes on what he is trying to accomplish. And it's not all him, but at some point there is also something to be said for the ability to elevate the team that is around you, and he has not been able to do that. The Jets are certainly a better team when he's on the field, but some concerns about some inconsistent accuracy, not something that we expected to hear out of him coming out of USC, but it hasn't always been there. And some of the challenges for him when he's faced the blitz and teams have been able to, and that's not all him again because of some of the issues that he has at wide receiver, but some of those issues that he's had against the blitz and trying to deal with what other defenses are doing to attack him, he has not responded particularly well. It's been a struggle for him. So I'm going to go with Sam Darnold, a no to Sam Darnold as the future franchise quarterback of the Jets. I think they're going to move on. And that decision, of course, is made so much easier when you've got Trevor Lawrence waiting in the wings and a potential new head coach and a GM that did not draft him. Now, you can assign responsibility to that GM for not developing him and putting the necessary pieces around him, but he's not married to him, that he being Joe Douglas. And I think the Jets are going to move on, and I'm not buying Sam Darnold as the future franchise quarterback of the New York Jets. So now to the other New York team. This is an interesting one. I can't believe this one slipped through the cracks from our producer, Alex Wolves, because I don't know that I would have even let this air, this question, because I can't believe we're voting on it. But sure, we'll go with the Giants' chances in the NFC East at 1-7.
Yeah, it's funny. This is the division remains open. You can say that. The Giants remain 2 games out. So, over till the fat lady sings, as they say. And it is going to have to be a no for me. It is going to have to be an unfortunate thumbs down. But it's worth a try.
So you're going to have to stay with me on this one because this is going to take a little bit of explaining. But when you go to that theme park, right? You go to your Six Flags and there are roller coasters there. And it's great because there's Disney World, even a ride you want to go on. And there's no line. It's open. It's perfect. You can just walk right up and go on it. Well, the Giants don't meet the height requirement. They're not there yet, and they are not tall enough to ride the NFC East ride. That's how bad they are. That division is open for the taking. There's no doubt about that, except the Giants are so bad and have dug themselves such a hole. They're just not going to be there. They lose to the Cowboys. That's an ugly loss because Dallas looks awful right now. And as much as some of the play this past couple of weeks has been encouraging, let's not kid ourselves. They are 1 2-point conversion away from being 0-8 and being squarely in the conversation for getting Trevor Lawrence. That's how bad they have been. And I know that it's not all on one thing. I think Daniel Jones shares his number of blame and blame for that. And Joe Judge, at times early on, I didn't think the team was as prepared, although I think they've gotten better. And we're certainly ready to play Monday night. Jason Garrett, as their offensive coordinator, has really some blame to share on that offensive side of the ball that has really regressed, and that defense does look a lot better. But there's just no way. The Giants are not getting to the playoffs. I don't know how we even aired this question, Wolves, because it's so ridiculous. But at 1-7 and one
choosing them now
version away by Kyle Allen and the Washington football team from being 0-8. There are some good things, but this is a team. Good teams find ways to win, and the Giants find ways to lose. They're not tall enough. They're not allowed to go on the Disney World ride, the Six Flags ride. Even though there's no line, they're not getting on the roller coaster. That's a hard no to the Giants' chances in the NFC East. So that's just where that is, and I'll leave it at that. Okay, now we're voting yes or no to the Steelers at 7-0, the lone undefeated remaining in the National Football League. Are the Steelers the NFL's top team?
Yeah, I mean, I was wrong about the Pittsburgh Steelers. I certainly thought they'd be competitive. Did not think they'd be 7-0 here. I'm going to stick with my instinct, which is that they are not the best team in the National Football League. I didn't even think that they were, a top 5 team in this league. So they've impressed me. Are they better than the Ravens? It looks like it. I would say that. But they aren't better than the Kansas City Chiefs. I can't put them there. If we're talking about the league at large, I can't put them ahead of the Seattle Seahawks. Those two teams, to me, remain the best teams in the National Football League. This Steelers team at every turn has impressed me this year. Ben Roethlisberger, I thought would be entering some kind of decline, but the guy just keeps on kicking. So kudos to the Steelers. But and I do think that they are hands-on favorite to win that division, but I don't think they're the best team in all of football.
I do agree with you that I'm pretty certain they're going to win their division because Baltimore has regressed a little bit, particularly on the offense. And Lamar has, I don't want to say they figured him out because you don't figure out Lamar Jackson, but I think teams are better equipped to deal with what Baltimore is throwing at them or not, as the case may be. And the wide receiver core ultimately is an issue for the Ravens in Baltimore, in addition to some of the losses that the Ravens have sustained on their offensive line that are now worse because Ronnie Stanley, their all-pro left tackle, is going to be unavailable for them with an ankle injury for the rest of the season. He's done. So that's only going to make things more difficult. Marshall Yanda is a guy in Baltimore that retires, and I think that was a big deal for them. So I think the Steelers, with the weapons that they have on offense and on defense, they got a really good defense, are the best team in that AFC North. I don't want to talk about the Cleveland Browns. They're not there. And certainly Cincinnati isn't even in the conversation. They can't get on the roller coaster either. So that's that. But I am going to also with you vote no here because I do not think that they are the best team in football. And I think you rightly point out that the Kansas City Chiefs are better than they are right now because the Chiefs are just so explosive on offense and you can't stop them. There's nothing that you can do that is going to slow down this Kansas City attack. They've got too many weapons that they can throw at you. Le'Veon Bell, the latest, to add more to their running game with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You know what they have on the outside. Travis Kelce is right now the best tight end in football with the injury to George Kittle. So they've got that title back. But they have so many weapons, and Patrick Mahomes is such a playmaker. And that's not a knock on Pittsburgh, because I think nuts and bolts wise, the Steelers have the best roster in the AFC. I do. I think they have the best roster from top to bottom, the talent they have on defense and the weapons that they have on offense with James Conner and just some of the receivers that they have, Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool. They've got weapons everywhere. And they needed a competent quarterback to step in and take the reins. And that's why they struggled last year, because when it's Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, you're not going to have success. Ben Roethlisberger has been good, serviceable to good this year. He hasn't been great. He's not going to get back there. He's 38, 39 years old at the twilight of his career. So they're not ever going to be this dynamic, explosive offense. But when you have Roethlisberger competently throwing the football, they've just got so many looks and weapons that they can throw at you that they're going to have a lot of success, coupled with their defense that can get stop after stop when they need to. So I really like what I've seen out of Pittsburgh, but their offense is not as explosive and cannot find that next gear the way that Kansas City can. Kansas City's defense was also extremely impressive to me towards the tail end of last season and was a catalyst for them getting to the Super Bowl and ultimately winning it. Even though things did not go great and they were down a number of times, they were able to correct things not only on offense but on defense to get the necessary stops to allow them to catch up and ultimately go on those big scoring runs. So I'm a big fan and a big believer in Kansas City. Pittsburgh's right there, and they could give them a run for their money. That would certainly be an ultra competitive AFC championship game. But right now, if you're asking me who I'm picking, I'm taking Kansas City, and I think Kansas City still is the best team in the NFL. So we'll finish up the yes or no vote on this one. A pair of MVP races in baseball. The American League MVP is down to DJ LeMahieu, Jose Ramirez, and Jose Abreu. Ramirez of the Cleveland Indians, Abreu of the Chicago White Sox. Everybody knows DJ LeMahieu with the Yankees. And then the NL, it's Mookie Betts of the Dodgers, Freddie Freeman of the Atlanta Braves, and then Manny Machado in San Diego with the Padres. We'll go first with our AL picks. LeMahieu, Ramirez, Abreu. Who are you voting yes?
So I'll be brief as we run out of time here. Of the candidates, I've searched my conscience, and I have to cast my vote here for Jose Abreu in the American League. Second in all of baseball and home runs. This guy, RBI, 60. 19 bombs, hit over 300. He's doing everything. National League, this is Freddie Freeman's year, part of a very good Braves team. And the numbers here also unbelievable, 341, 13 homers, but 53 RBI jumps off the page, and an OPS over 1,000 jumps off the page. So give me Freeman in the National League, Abreu in the American League.
This is a tough one. I'll also be brief. In the American League, it's DJ LeMahieu. Enough said. I know I'm a little bit biased because I'm a big Yankees fan, but to me, the mark of a most valuable player is what your team looks like when you are gone. The Yankees had a great start to the season in 2020. When DJ LeMahieu goes down and gets hurt, they go 5-15 and have one of their worst stretches of the last couple of years in a 60-game season. DJ LeMahieu was everything to that Yankees lineup. He added so much to not only offensively, but defensively. DJ LeMahieu is the American League MVP in a very short season. No disrespect to what Jose Ramirez and Jose Abreu accomplished. Those were two great seasons. But to me, DJ LeMahieu, you take him out of that Yankees lineup, they're really going to struggle. And they did, as much as they missed him. In the NL now, we've got Betts, Freeman, and Machado. Who you got?
I gave it to you. I'm taking Freeman.
Did I miss that?
Yeah, I bundled it all together, Nick. Just give me.
Okay, wow. Okay, so he's got Freeman. That's tough. Okay, I'm gonna go with Mookie Betts because I love what Freddie Freeman did. He's my number 2 here. But again, the mark of the team is what it looks like when you're not there. He pushed them over the top. I love what Mookie Betts did in his first year in Los Angeles. He was so important to that team and their postseason run. I know it's a regular season award, but he was great in the regular season too. So Mookie Betts is my pick. I'll pay attention next time, Baccia. I promise you that I will be more on top of it. That's it for us here on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. If you missed any of today's segments, they will be available on demand on WFUV Sports' Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook pages, as well as on YouTube. For our producer, Alex Wolz, and Chris Baccia, I'm Nick DeLuca saying thanks for hanging out with us. One on One is a production of WFUV Sports.